The rain had that steady, patient sound that makes you believe the world is sorting itself out. And my phone was warm against my cheek when the recruiter finished saying the number that would change everything. I remember the smell of coffee going cool and the little tremor in my fingers as I said, "Yes, I'm interested." I walked into our apartment with a grin that felt too big for my face, expecting him to stand to scoop me up to say he knew I could do it. Instead, Ethan kept scrolling thumb moving like a metronome and asked when I planned to tell them no, as if my future were a nuisance to reschedule. The room shrank to the width of our gray couch, and the one lamp he insisted we keep on a dimmer washed everything in a forgiving glow that suddenly felt false. Outside, tires hissed over wet pavement. Inside, his mouth tightened in a line I had learned to read as final. It wasn't a fight, not yet, just a sentence that landed like a lid on a jar. "If you loved me, you wouldn't go." I stood there with damp hair and a heart that wouldn't sit still, realizing the rain wasn't the only reason the air felt heavy. "Before I go further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your promise to yourself. Leave a comment. And if this kind of true family story speaks to you, don't forget to like and subscribe so more of us can find our way back to our own voices. My name is Wanda, 29 years old, the first in my family to write software for a living, raised in a town where people still wave from pickup trucks, and Sunday dinners mean folding chairs around a too small table. My mother packed hope the way other moms packed lunches, simple, steady, a note tucked in where I'd find it later, while I learned to make the most of hand-me-down laptops and a spotty library Wi-Fi connection. When I met Ethan, I mistook charm for kindness and ease for effort. He was funny and handsome and had a way of making ordinary evenings feel like the soft part of a song. We moved in together because rent seemed less frightening split in two, and because in photos we looked like a plan. On paper, we were fine. I wrote code late. He posted content early. We traded takeout menus and made weekend plans that were mostly mine to adjust. Harmony lived in the little decisions: his gym across town, his favorite Thai place, his preference for my hair a certain way. And I told myself compromise was love, the way a tired person tells herself the dim light is cozy. The differences we pretended not to notice had roots, though, and they tugged when the wind picked up. I'd grown up on layaway and coupons, saving for a used car in a shoebox under my bed, careful with money because I knew how quickly it disappeared. Ethan loved a new release like a holiday, loved reservations more than recipes, loved telling me to relax when the checking account sighed. In photos, he took up the center. In conversations, he took the final word. And I kept giving ground, because I believed women who keep the peace are rewarded with a quieter life. When the recruiter called from California, my chest filled with light, then dread, because I already knew the first test would not be a coding challenge, but a threshold. Does our love make room for me to grow, or does it ask me to stay the same so he can stay comfortable? I tried to offer him bridges, trial months, frequent flights, a spare key on both coasts, and watched him knock each one down with a casual, almost gentle certainty that left no fingerprints. That night, after the rain softened to a whisper, and the apartment slipped into that post-midnight hush, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how many times I'd moved my own line to keep us from arguing, how often I'd worn what made him proud and put away what made me feel like myself. The offer email sat in my drafts like a lighthouse in fog, steady and impossible to ignore. I turned on my side and watched the blue pulse of his charging phone light his jaw, and I knew the question had stopped being about a job hours ago. It was about whether I would keep teaching him that my dreams were negotiable. When his breathing fell into that soft rhythm I used to find comforting, I finally let myself admit what I would do in the morning. And when the sun came up The only thing left to decide was whether I'd be the one to say it to his face or the one to let my choice speak for me. The first days after the offer felt like moving through two different worlds at once. At work, I carried the news like a secret flame, a glow that warmed me, even through the dullest tasks. At home, Ethan's silence settled over us like a heavy blanket, smothering every attempt I made to talk about possibilities. When I asked if we could sit down and look at the logistics together, he gave a dismissive shake of his head, telling me I was chasing a fantasy. He had no interest in even pretending to support me, and the dismissal stung deeper than if he had simply shouted. One evening, I set dinner on the table, grilled chicken rice and vegetables, and tried again, my voice steady. Ethan, this isn't just a job. It's a chance to work on projects that could set my whole career on a new path. He leaned back in his chair, fork tapping against the plate, and told me I was exaggerating. People don't just pick up and move across the country for some salary bump, he said flatly. My chest tightened as I realized he hadn't even listened. He didn't hear the part about growth, about finally being recognized after years of grinding. All he saw was disruption to his routine. Later that night, as I folded laundry in the quiet, Ethan came to stand in the doorway. His arms were crossed, his voice almost casual. You need to stop talking about this, Wanda. It's not happening. I set down a stack of shirts, my hands trembling as I tried to keep calm. So, you're telling me I have no choice, that I should just keep doing what makes you comfortable? His jaw tightened. I'm telling you, if you loved me, you'd stay. I don't want to argue about it again. He left before I could answer the sound of the television filling the silence where our conversation should have been. I began noticing how easily he expected me to bend. It wasn't just about the move. The car I drove had been his choice, more practical for him than for me. The vacations we took were always his picked destinations where he had friends or favorite restaurants. Even the clothes I wore to parties often came after his suggestions about what looked better. I had convinced myself these were small compromises, but stacked together, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Each memory came back sharper now, colored by the same demand he had just made: choose him or lose him. The following weekend, we joined a few of his friends for drinks at a rooftop bar. They laughed and swapped stories while I sat quiet watching Ethan perform. He told them how proud he was of his steady work and how he liked keeping life simple. At one point, his friend asked me about my work, and I started to explain the new opportunity. Ethan cut me off mid-sentence, joking that I got carried away with computer talk and that I wasn't really going anywhere. The table laughed politely, but I sat frozen, cheeks burning. It wasn't just the dismissal, it was the public certainty that my dream meant nothing at all. That night when we returned home, I asked him why he'd done that. He shrugged, tossing his jacket over the couch. No one wants to hear about Code Wanda. You take things too seriously. My voice cracked as I said, It's my life, Ethan. It matters to me. He turned with a look that was half annoyance, half disbelief. Your life. We're building a life together, and that doesn't involve you running off to California. I watched him disappear into the bedroom, leaving me with the echo of his words and the weight of what I already knew. This was not partnership. It was control. The silence between us stretched in the days that followed. At night, I lay awake, staring at the faint blue light from his phone on the nightstand. He scrolled until he drifted off, oblivious to the thoughts that kept me wide-eyed. Each time his arm fell across me, heavy and possessive, I felt the cage of his expectations close tighter. I told myself I had to be careful that if I revealed too much, he would make these last weeks unbearable. So I stayed quiet, answering his casual questions with neutral words, while inside I counted the days until I could leave. It was during those quiet nights that the true cost of compromise became clear. I remembered the times I'd skipped projects to join him for events he wanted. The times I'd canceled plans with friends because he sulked when I went without him. The birthdays and milestones of my own that were treated like afterthoughts while his were celebrated with grand gestures. Each memory was like a stitch in a tapestry I had ignored for too long, and now the picture was undeniable. This wasn't love balanced on respect. It was love twisted into submission. One afternoon, I stopped at a coffee shop near the office, needing space to think. The hum of conversation around me was soothing a buffer against the storm at home. I opened my laptop, stared at the blank email draft, and let my fingers hover over the keyboard. My heart raced at the thought of pressing accept, of taking the leap without asking permission. The decision filled me with fear, but also with a strange calm. For the first time, I imagined a life that was truly mine, unshaped by anyone else's demands. It felt terrifying and exhilarating, all at once. When I returned home that evening, Ethan was stretched across the couch, phone in hand, a grin on his face. He told me his buddy had invited him to another launch party and asked if I would tag along. His tone was casual, as if nothing had passed between us, as if my career were a footnote to his social calendar. I nodded, playing along because I knew then what he did not. My silence no longer meant surrender, it meant preparation. Each polite smile, each quiet agreement was another step toward freedom. The decision was made. The only question was how to carry it out without letting him crush me on the way out. The night ended with him asleep, his breathing, even the glow of his phone fading on the nightstand. I lay awake once more, listening to the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. My chest ached with the weight of secrets, but beneath it all, I felt a flicker of strength. Ethan believed he had won, that his will was the only voice that mattered. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was the first crack in a wall that would not hold much longer. And as I closed my eyes, I understood that soon the silence would end, and my choice would speak louder than any argument ever could. The weekend dragged like a weight tied to my ankles. Ethan carried himself as if the matter were already settled, as if my silence had been the answer he wanted. He booked brunch reservations, talked about buying a dog, and even joked about redecorating the apartment in the fall. I laughed in the right places, smiled when he looked at me, and felt the air leave my chest every time I pretended. Each moment was a reminder that he believed he had won, and the ache of knowing what I was about to do pressed against my ribs until I could barely breathe. On Monday night, I lay awake, staring at the shadows stretching across the ceiling. Ethan had fallen asleep within minutes, his arm heavy across my waist, his soft snore filling the dark. I whispered to myself that this was the last night I would carry the weight of pretending. My mind raced through every step I had planned: the new bank account, the movers, the letter I had written and rewritten until the ink smudged under my hand. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my heart, telling myself that tomorrow I would finally begin again. When Tuesday morning came, I dressed quietly and left the apartment with my laptop bag slung across my shoulder. I kissed Ethan on the cheek as if it were any other day, watched him lace his sneakers for his spin class, and smiled when he told me to have a good one. My legs carried me down the stairs and out into the brisk air, but instead of heading to the office, I walked 3 blocks to a small coffee shop. The smell of roasted beans and fresh pastries barely touched me as I found a corner table. My fingers shook as I typed a short message to the movers I'm out. "You can go in now." Their reply came back with a simple thumbs up, and my hands wouldn't stop trembling around the paper cup. For 3 hours, I sat with a latte that had gone lukewarm, watching the screen of my phone light up with each update. Desk and electronics packed. Then bedroom complete. Finally, truck loaded. Each notification felt like the beat of a drum marking the end of the life I had known. I pictured the apartment as it transformed in my absence, the empty spaces where my books had stood, the bare floor where my desk once sat, the silence left behind in rooms that had once held my laughter. My chest tightened as I realized there would be no going back. By noon, it was finished. I walked back to the apartment, heart thudding, and unlocked the door to a place that no longer felt like mine. The couch and bed remained, the television still sat in the corner, but the pieces of me were gone. The walls seemed to echo the emptiness louder than any argument. I set the letter on the kitchen counter, smoothing the paper where my hand had trembled the night before. Ethan. It began, "I know this will feel like betrayal, but it isn't. You gave me a choice, my career or you. I chose myself." Beside it, I left a check for 2 months' rent and my key. I closed the door behind me with a final click that seemed to echo down the hall. Before I reached the street, my phone lit with his name flashing in angry bursts. The texts came fast, questions and demands piling one on top of the other. "What's happening? Where are you? This isn't funny. Answer me." Then came the calls, vibrating so hard it felt like my pocket might shatter. I stared at the screen, guilt pressing against the cold resolve in my chest, and I chose silence. He had already asked me to choose. My answer had been given. That evening, I checked into a modest hotel near the airport. The room smelled faintly of bleach and held only the bare essentials, but it felt like sanctuary. I sat on the bed, watching the sunset streak the sky with crimson and gold. And for the first time that day, I let myself cry. My apartment was gone, my relationship over, and even my silence had become a wall I could never climb back across. With shaking hands, I opened my laptop and typed the words that sealed my choice. I am thrilled to accept the offer. I am ready to relocate as soon as possible. When I pressed send, the tears dried, leaving behind something steadier than joy freedom. The next morning, I boarded my flight to California. I pressed my forehead against the window as the plane lifted, watching the grid of the city shrink into a patchwork of streets and rooftops. Somewhere down there, Ethan was pacing the apartment, telling his version of the story to anyone who would listen. I could almost hear him rehearsing the words, spinning himself into the victim while I became the villain. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Let him," because the story was no longer his to tell. Corporate housing wasn't luxurious, but when I unlocked the door to the small apartment assigned to me, it felt like a palace. A modest kitchen, a single bedroom with blinds that rattled in the breeze, and a balcony overlooking the mountains, it was mine. I walked through the rooms with quiet reverence, touched the counters, opened the closet, stood on the balcony with the wind in my hair. No arguments about where to put the chair. No passive comments about the dishes. Just mine. The next morning, nerves twisted in my stomach as I walked into the new office. The glass buildings shimmered in the sun, and the courtyard bustled with people who seemed genuinely glad to be there. My manager, Andrea, greeted me with warmth that caught me off guard. Her handshake steady, her smile wide. Over lunch, she laid out a growth path that seemed almost impossible to believe principal engineer in 3 to 5 years if I kept at it. I listened, nodding a lump in my throat as I realized this was real. For once, the long nights and quiet sacrifices had led me somewhere worth being. For 2 days, I let myself breathe, stepping into projects with eager focus and walking the trails around campus at lunch. At night, I stood on the balcony with a glass of wine, breathing in the California air. I told myself I had escaped clean, that the past was behind me, and the new life I had dreamed of was beginning. But peace has a short shelf life when you've left someone like Ethan behind. On the third day, my phone rang. My mother's voice carried a strain I had learned to recognize even as a child. "Wanda," she said, "what on earth happened? Ethan's been here for hours, crying, saying you abandoned him. How could you?" My hand froze around the glass of water I was holding, the mountains standing silent beyond the window. I opened my mouth to explain, but the weight of her judgment pressed in before I spoke. Ethan's tears, it seemed, had traveled farther than my truth. And that was the moment I realized my escape had not ended the fight, it had only begun. My mother's voice on the phone lingered in my ears long after the call ended. She had sounded more concerned for Ethan than for me, as though his tears were proof that I was the one at fault. I sat on the edge of my bed in the small apartment, staring at the mountains in the distance, and wondered how quickly sympathy could bend when someone knew how to cry in the right direction. I had expected anger from Ethan, but I hadn't expected to feel my own mother slipping from my side so easily. The next blow came from someone I had trusted for years. Jake called, his tone careful, almost apologetic. He told me Ethan was flooding his social media with posts about betrayal and heartbreak, painting himself as the abandoned partner left with nothing. "Wanda, he's telling people you drained the apartment," Jake said quietly. "He's even claiming you took his grandmother's china." I sat frozen, heat rising in my neck. I hadn't touched a single thing that wasn't mine. "That's not true," I whispered. Jake sighed, his eyes darting away from the camera. "I know, but a lot of people believe him. He's convincing." The realization settled heavy in my chest. It wasn't enough for Ethan to lose me. He needed to rewrite the story so thoroughly that I disappeared from it, replaced by a villain of his own design. By the time I hung up, I felt stripped bare, like even my oldest friendships weren't strong enough to withstand the tide of his performance. That night, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, the city lights blinking below like distant signals. My hands trembled as I held the stem of the glass, and I understood for the first time that he wasn't just angry. He was mobilizing. The following morning, the assault moved closer. I opened my work email to find a message from Ethan's mother. The subject line read, "What you did to my son." Her words cut like a blade. She told me Ethan had supported me for years, that he had built his life around mine, and I had ruined him. She described him as unable to eat, unable to sleep, as though I had committed some cruelty beyond forgiveness. I closed my laptop with such force that the sound echoed in the empty room. My hands shook not from fear, but from the deep sting of being accused by someone who had never once asked for my side. Before the day was over, another email arrived, this time from his father. His words were colder, more deliberate. He spoke of moral obligations, of how Ethan had sacrificed for me, and of what I supposedly owed in return. Then came the proposal: pay 6 months' rent, provide a settlement of $25,000, and agree to return for mediation. He called it generous, as if he were granting me leniency in some courtroom. I read the email twice, disbelief pounding through me. They weren't asking for closure. They were demanding compensation, as though a relationship were a business contract I had broken without notice. I called Andrea that evening, my voice tight, as I explained what had been happening. She listened, then connected me to the company's legal team. A lawyer named Michael took the call, his voice sharp but reassuring. After I described the emails, he actually laughed softly. "You don't owe them anything," he said firmly. "Document everything. Don't respond. If they escalate, we'll issue a cease and desist." His certainty was a rope thrown to me in a storm. I thanked him, clutching my phone like it was the only solid thing in the room. For a moment, relief washed over me. But even with legal support behind me, the dread lingered. Ethan wasn't simply lashing out. He was constructing a narrative where I was the betrayer and he the victim. And worse, people were listening. The confirmation came late that night when my phone buzzed with a message from a number I hadn't seen in years. It was Daniel, the man I had dated before Ethan. "Heard what you did," his message read. "That was cold, even for you." My stomach dropped. I stared at the words, struggling to process how my past had been pulled into Ethan's web. Curiosity led me to Ethan's latest post. There he was, looking tragically noble in a dimly lit bar, with a caption about being left for money. Beneath it, comment after comment piled sympathy on him, painting me as heartless. And then among them, Daniel's words, "You'll get through it, man." She pulled the same stuff on me. My breath caught fury burning hot. That was a lie, and Daniel knew it. Ethan had not only convinced my family and friends he was rewriting history with people who had no stake in our story. The ground beneath me felt unsteady, as though I were standing on sand slowly giving way. I turned off my phone and sat in the dark. The city beyond my window was alive with light, but all I could feel was the weight pressing against my ribs. Ethan wasn't just punishing me for leaving. He was trying to erase me, to replace me with a caricature that served his story. And the terrifying part was how easily others accepted it. I whispered into the night, more vow than thought. "Not this time. You don't get to own the story anymore." The days that followed blurred together, each one bringing new messages from Ethan's family. His mother sent updates about his supposed suffering, insisting I reach out. His sister chimed in, accusing me of running from responsibility. And his father's emails grew bolder, first demanding $25,000, then $50,000, along with the car that was in my name. They used subject lines that mimicked legal memos, as if formality could disguise the desperation beneath. Every message was another attempt to wear me down. I forwarded each one to Michael, who assured me their threats were hollow. "They're bluffing," he said. "Stay quiet. If they take one step further, we'll act." His confidence steadied me, but at night the silence filled with echoes of their words. I replayed each accusation, each demand, until my chest ached. The guilt they tried to plant in me pressed hard, but beneath it grew something else, anger. They weren't seeking understanding. They were shaking me down, trying to bleed me dry of money, of dignity, of peace. One evening, I sat at the kitchen counter with dinner untouched in front of me, rereading one of Martin Caldwell's emails. The words blurred, but the message was clear: pay or face the ruin of your reputation. I set down my chopsticks, my hands steady now instead of trembling. Fear had begun to transform into something sharper. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't cornered. They had underestimated me, mistaking my silence for weakness. The night stretched long as I walked to the pier near my apartment, the salty air wrapping around me. The water shimmered under the moonlight, and the sound of waves hitting the pilings echoed in the stillness. For the first time since leaving, I let myself cry freely, the tears falling into the wind. But as I wiped my face, another truth rose stronger than grief. I had spent years folding myself smaller so Ethan could feel bigger. I had mistaken control for love. And even now, from miles away, he was trying to script my life. I gripped the railing, my voice raw, as I whispered to the water, "You don't get to write me anymore." The words were carried off by the wind, but they anchored me. When I walked back home that night, my shoulders felt lighter. Ethan could keep spinning stories, could recruit his family, could try to drag others into his web. But the truth was still mine, waiting for its moment. And I knew that moment was coming soon, because silence could protect me only so long before I would have to answer back. The quiet that followed my vow on the pier did not last long. 2 weeks passed, and I let myself believe Ethan's storm might be settling. The messages slowed, the demands from his parents thinned, and for the first time in months, I felt my chest loosen. I stayed late at work one evening, losing myself in code, until the office lights dimmed, and when I finally walked to the parking garage, exhaustion pressed heavy across my shoulders. The garage was too quiet, the kind of stillness that makes your steps sound louder than they are. I spotted him before my mind could make sense of it, Ethan leaning against my car, as if he belonged there. His shirt was unbuttoned, one notch too low, his cologne strong enough to carry through the air. My stomach dropped so sharply I thought I might faint. He straightened and called my name in a voice soft enough to pass for pleading. I gripped the strap of my bag, forcing my voice steady. "No, Ethan. We don't need to talk." He stepped closer, spreading his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I flew all the way here. The least you can do is hear me out." The isolation of the garage pressed in on me, too many shadows, too much silence. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him in a nearby cafe where the hum of voices could shield me. We sat across from each other at a small table, steam rising between us from untouched cups. Ethan stirred his latte with careful precision, as though the swirl of milk could anchor his courage. "Maybe I was too quick to dismiss this," he said at last, eyes flicking up to mine. "Silicon Valley could be an adventure. I could start a wellness brand, maybe even open a boutique gym. You were right, there's potential here." His smile looked rehearsed, his words polished. It didn't take long to see what had brought him across the country. He hadn't come because he missed me. He had done the math. I shook my head slowly. "Ethan, we're not together anymore." His expression shifted from hope to disbelief, disbelief to anger. "You can't be serious. 4 years, Wanda. You don't just throw that away." I leaned forward, my voice quiet but firm. "You're right. You don't. Which is why I'll never forget that you asked me to end it all for your comfort. You gave me the ultimatum. I made my choice." The crack in his composure showed then. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the cups, and hissed. "I didn't end it. You did. You abandoned me." I stared at him, heart pounding, but steady. "You told me to choose between you and my career. I chose my career. That's not abandonment, Ethan. That's survival." His jaw tightened, his voice lowering to a venomous hiss. "I was testing you, Wanda, and you failed." The rest of the conversation turned like a storm, shifting from guilt to rage to bargaining in dizzying waves. He claimed he had supported me through everything, then accused me of being selfish. He said we could try long distance, then told me I'd ruined his life. Finally, his tone softened to seduction, his hand brushing mine across the table. "Remember how good we were together, you and me, unstoppable." I pulled back as though burned. We weren't unstoppable. I was just the one who kept giving in. When none of it worked, his mask slipped. He leaned closer, his voice low and sharp. "Fine. If you won't take me back then, you owe me." I laughed, a sound that startled even me. "Owe you? For what?" His eyes narrowed. "For humiliating me, for wasting 4 years, for destroying my reputation. Everyone knows you left me. You made me look pathetic." My voice turned cold. "Your reputation is ruined because you lied, not because of me." His next words made the room spin. "I want $50,000. I blinked, certain I had misheard. "What?" He leaned back, almost smug. 50,000. Emotional damages, lost opportunities. I had to restructure my whole life because of you." A laugh burst from me, bitter and sharp. Heads turned at nearby tables, but I didn't care. "You've lost your mind. No court is going to award you money because your girlfriend broke up with you. His face reddened, his hand shaking as he gripped his cup. Then I'll sue you. Breach of implied contract. We had plans, marriage, a family. You can't just walk away from that without consequences. I gathered my bag, my voice steady now. Good luck with that, Ethan. Adults don't test each other, they talk. And I'm done talking. As I turned to leave, his voice rose behind me loud enough to make the cafe fall silent. Sarah was right about you. I froze in place. Sarah, the ex he claimed was only a friend. Slowly, I turned back. Sarah. The one who's been married for 3 years, the one you convinced to lie for you. His mouth opened, then shut. For the first time, his mask cracked completely. I smiled, sharp enough to cut. Tell her husband I said hello. The color drained from his face. I walked into the night air with my heart hammering, but lighter than it had been in months. He hadn't come to win me back. He had come to reclaim power. And for the first time in years, he had failed. The next morning, Jake sent me screenshots of Ethan's social media. His stories showed the apartment now cluttered with pizza boxes and laundry captioned with claims of financial abuse. Another post had him staring into the distance with text about love being worth nothing when money was involved. Comments poured in calling me selfish, heartless, a gold digger. My chest tightened as I scrolled, but then came the comment that made me laugh in disbelief. If anyone knows a good lawyer, DM me. 4 years together should mean something legally. Jake's message underneath was blunt. He's trying to get alimony from a girlfriend. He's lost it. By the 4th day, the circus had grown. My HR department emailed me about an external complaint linking to a LinkedIn post Ethan had written. He accused the company of rewarding selfishness, tagging them in his declaration that Silicon Valley stole not just talent, but souls. My stomach dropped as I marched into Andrea's office. She read the post, snorted, and dialed HR herself. Within minutes, they assured me a cease and desist had already been issued. Andrea patted my arm and said, "This isn't your shame, it's his. Keep working. We've got your back." For the first time, I didn't feel alone in the crossfire. Meanwhile, Ethan's life outside the screen unraveled. Jake told me his part-time job had let him go after too many missed shifts. His parents, once so quick to demand money from me, had started whispering about his bad decisions. And then, in a final grasp for sympathy, he launched a fundraiser online titled, "Starting Over Surviving Financial Abandonment." He asked for $20,000. He raised $45, all of it from his mother, before the campaign was reported for fraud and removed within 2 days. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt tired. Tired of watching him set fires just to send me smoke. Tired of being pulled into his theater of victimhood. So I stopped looking. I told Jake to update me only if Ethan made a legal move. I blocked every new account, muted his name on every platform, and turned my focus inward. The quiet that followed wasn't peace, but it was enough. Yet even in the stillness, I knew Ethan wasn't finished. Men like him didn't retreat when they lost. They searched for new ways to claw back what they believed was theirs. And as I stood on my balcony one night, the city glittering below, I realized the fight was shifting. Ethan had failed to take my future, but he hadn't stopped trying to haunt it. And I understood then this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming the story he kept trying to steal. The quiet I had fought for didn't last. 2 weeks after Ethan's fundraiser collapsed, I found myself working late again. The office nearly empty, the glow of monitors painting the halls in soft light. By the time I shut my laptop and walked to the garage, the air was heavy with the smell of oil and faint echoes of footsteps. My body froze when I saw him, Ethan leaning against my car, as if waiting for a date. His shirt was crisp hair styled, the cloying smell of his cologne wrapping around me before he even spoke. "Wanda," he said softly, "we need to talk." My hand gripped the strap of my bag so tightly it burned against my palm. "No," I answered, my voice sharper than I intended. "We don't." He stepped closer, spreading his arms like he meant no harm. "I flew here. The least you can do is give me 10 minutes. The emptiness of the garage pressed in shadows, swallowing the corners. Against my better judgment, I nodded toward the cafe across the street. We sat opposite each other at a small table. The hum of voices around us kept me steady. He stirred his coffee, avoiding my eyes, until the silence became unbearable. Maybe I was too quick to say no. He began, rehearsed, smile flickering. "California could be good for me too. I could start fresh, open a boutique gym, launch my wellness brand." "You were right. This place has potential." His words landed like calculations, not confessions. He hadn't come to mend anything. He had come because he had counted the dollar signs in my new salary. I leaned back, shaking my head. "We're not together anymore, Ethan." The hope slid from his face, replaced first by disbelief, then by anger. "You can't just walk away from 4 years, Wanda." I met his stare, my voice steady. "You're right. You don't just walk away." But I didn't. "You gave me an ultimatum: my career, or you. I chose my career." The mask cracked. His hand slammed against the table, rattling the cups. "I didn't end anything. You did. You abandoned me." My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "No, Ethan. You told me to choose." "I finally did." He leaned forward, hissing. "I was testing you, and you failed." The words, instead of piercing, rolled off like something I had heard too many times before. He tried every tactic he had ever used on me. Guilt telling me he had carried me through lean years. Anger calling me selfish and heartless. Bargaining suggesting long distance until he found his footing. Even seduction brushing his fingers across mine. Each attempt chipped away at his composure as I pulled back unmoved. When nothing worked, he shifted to threat. "You owe me," he said coldly. I laughed short and bitter. "Owe you what?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. 50,000. Emotional damages, lost opportunities. I had to restructure my whole life because of you." My laugh grew louder, drawing glances from nearby tables. "You're out of your mind, Ethan. No court will make me pay you for breaking up with you." His lips pulled tight, his face turning red. "Then I'll sue you. Breach of implied contract. We had plans, marriage, children. That means something." I gathered my bag, my chair scraping against the floor. "Good luck with that," I said calmly. "Adults don't test each other. They talk." "And you never did." I turned toward the door, but his voice cut through the cafe sharp and loud. "Sarah was right about you." I stopped mid-step, turning slowly. "Sarah?" I asked. "The same Sarah who's been married for 3 years? The one you convinced to lie for you?" For the first time that night, he faltered, mouth opening and closing with no words. I gave him a smile that felt like steel. "Tell her husband I said hello." Outside, the cool air filled my lungs like relief. My heart pounded, but it was lighter than it had been in years. Ethan hadn't come to win me back. He had come to take back control. And for the first time, he failed. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Jake. Screenshots of Ethan's latest social media tirade filled my screen. He had posted pictures of our old apartment littered with pizza boxes, claiming he was the victim of financial abuse. Another post showed him staring into the distance, text scrawled across it, "Love means nothing when money takes its place." The comments called me heartless, selfish, a gold digger. But then came one that made me shake my head in disbelief. "If anyone knows a good lawyer, DM me. 4 years together should mean something legally." Jake's note beneath was blunt. "He's trying to get alimony. He's lost it." By the 4th day, the chaos spilled into my professional life. My inbox lit up with a message from HR, external complaint regarding employee conduct. Inside was a link to a LinkedIn post. Ethan had tagged my company, accusing them of celebrating selfishness, claiming they stole souls along with talent. My stomach twisted as I walked straight to Andrea's office. She read the post, smirked, and called HR. Within minutes, they assured us a cease and desist had already been filed. Andrea looked at me firmly. "This isn't your shame, Wanda. It's his. Keep working. We'll handle the rest." Ethan's offline life began unraveling. Jake told me his part-time job had let him go after too many missed shifts. His parents, once demanding settlements from me, now whispered about his bad choices. And then came the most desperate move yet, a fundraiser titled "Starting Over, Surviving Financial Abandonment." He asked for $20,000. He raised $45,000, all of it from his mother, before the campaign was flagged for fraud and removed. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt bone-deep exhaustion. Watching Ethan burn everything around him just to throw smoke my way was draining. I told Jake not to send updates unless Ethan made a legal move. I blocked every account, muted his name everywhere, and redirected my focus inward. The stillness that followed wasn't peace, but it was a step closer. And yet, deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Men like Ethan didn't retreat. They circled, searching for new ways to claw back control. One night on my balcony, the city lights scattered across the bay like broken glass. I understood that silence wouldn't be enough anymore. He had failed to take my future, but he hadn't stopped trying to poison it. The time was coming when I would have to answer him not with anger or fear, but with something far stronger. Ethan's attempts to haunt me didn't vanish. They only shifted. I had stopped checking his online theatrics, but Jake still sent the occasional screenshot when something crossed the line. One night, his message lit up my phone. Ethan had posted yet another photo of himself, slouched in a dim bar, eyes cast down as though he carried the weight of the world. The caption accused me of abandoning him for money, and the comments were full of sympathy from people who didn't know the truth. I almost deleted the message unread, but what caught my attention was the line beneath. "Anyone know a lawyer who handles emotional damages?" 4 years of my life gone. It might have been laughable if not for the persistence behind it. He wasn't just trying to smear my name. He was testing boundaries, pushing further each time, hoping I would finally break. That realization settled like a stone in my stomach. I had survived his silence, his guilt, his family's demands, and even his ambush in a cafe, but this was something different. He wasn't just spinning stories anymore. He was searching for a way to drag me back under his control. I decided it was time to stop waiting for the next blow. The following morning, I called Michael, the company lawyer who had guided me through the earlier mess. His voice carried a touch of satisfaction when I explained what Ethan had been posting. "Good," he said firmly. "This makes our case stronger. We'll draft a cease and desist immediately. If he continues, we'll move to a restraining order. You've given him enough chances." The steadiness of his tone grounded me. For the first time, I felt the shift, not me on defense, but Ethan being forced back. That same week, my life outside the chaos began to take root in ways I hadn't expected. Maya and I had been spending more time together, coffee after long debugging sessions, dinners that stretched into conversations about everything except work, and late-night walks where the air felt softer somehow. One evening, as we stood on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights scattered like jewels beneath us, her hand brushed mine and didn't pull away. The moment was quiet, without demands or ultimatums, and I realized how foreign that felt. It wasn't about possession or performance. It was simply connection. We disclosed the relationship to HR the following week, careful to follow every rule, and their approval came without hesitation. That blessing felt like a door opening, a reminder that my life didn't have to remain defined by what I had escaped. Ethan could shout into every corner of the internet, but I was building something real work. I cared about a home that was mine, and a relationship not shaped by control. Even so, he wasn't finished. My mother called late one evening, her voice unsettled. "Wanda?" she whispered. "He showed up here." My chest tightened. "At your house?" She sighed heavily. "Yes. He said he needed your new address, that he had belongings to collect." I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. I didn't take anything of his mom. "There's nothing for him to collect." Her voice grew softer. "I told him that, and eventually he admitted it. He just wanted to see where you were living to prove you were doing better without him." The silence between us carried a weight that had nothing to do with him anymore. Finally, she said, "Wanda, I owe you an apology. I should have believed you sooner." Tears stung my eyes, and I swallowed against the lump in my throat. "Thank you, Mom. Better late than never." She gave a short laugh through her own weariness. I gave him $20 for gas and told him to lose my number. That night, I stood on my balcony, again the wind lifting the edge of my hair, Maya beside me with her hand resting gently against mine. I thought about everything Ethan had tried to take my reputation, my peace, even my family's trust. And I realized he hadn't ruined me. He had revealed himself, and in doing so, he had freed me. By the time Michael called to tell me the cease and desist had been delivered, I felt steadier than I had in months. Ethan's posts slowed, his circle of supporters grew quiet, and even his parents stopped their constant stream of demands. What had once been a roar dwindled to background noise I no longer cared to hear. The collapse of his world wasn't mine to mourn. It was the inevitable end of the theater he had built, one lie stacked on top of another, until the weight of it crushed him. And as I leaned against the railing with Maya's laughter carrying softly through the night air, I understood that my revenge hadn't come from lawyers or public humiliation. It had come from choosing myself, from stepping into a life he could never follow. Ethan had wanted control, but what he lost was far greater. He lost the chance to stand beside me when I finally stopped shrinking. The fight was nearly over, though one final reckoning still waited. I could feel it approaching, quiet, but certain, like the pause before the last note of a song. The silence that followed felt different this time. Not the heavy kind that used to hang between Ethan and me, but the kind that came after a storm had passed. His voice no longer filled my phone. His name no longer lingered on the edge of every conversation. The cease and desist had done its work, and even his most loyal defenders had grown quiet. For the first time in years, my life belonged entirely to me. At work, I found myself thriving in ways I hadn't dared imagine. Andrea placed me on projects that challenged me, surrounded by colleagues who valued what I brought to the table. The long nights I once spent hunched over side projects in silence now carried purpose. When I walked across campus, the glass buildings shining in the sun, I felt a steady pride instead of the ache of proving myself. And when I came home at night, the space was warm, welcoming, and mine. My mother eventually called again, her tone gentler than before. She admitted she had been swayed by Ethan's tears and stories, but seeing him show up on her doorstep demanding attention had stripped away the last of her doubt. "You deserved better all along," she said quietly, and I could hear the truth of it in her voice. It wasn't the apology I had longed for, but it was real, and it was enough. Our conversations since then have been softer, less weighed down by judgment, more like the ones we shared before I let Ethan become the louder voice. And then there was Maya. What began as shared coffees and long walks deepened into something that reminded me of how love should feel, light, steady, and free from calculation. We laughed together without glancing over our shoulders, and our silences were easy instead of heavy. Standing on my balcony with her hand in mine, I realized this was what I had been waiting for all along. Not perfection, but peace. As for Ethan, his world collapsed the way houses of cards always do. His job was gone, his family tired of carrying his complaints, his social circle dwindling to a few voices that no longer carried weight. The man who once demanded I choose between love and ambition ended up with neither. He had wanted control, but all he was left with was the echo of his own bitterness. Looking back, I see how close I came to letting him write my story for me. For years, I told myself compromise was love, when really it was silence eroding my voice. The hardest lesson wasn't walking away, it was believing I was worth more than staying. Choosing myself wasn't betrayal, it was survival. And in the end, it was the only way forward. Now when I think about those months, I don't dwell on the chaos he caused. I think about the strength it took to stay quiet until I could act the courage it took to step onto that plane, and the dignity it took to let the truth speak louder than his lies. Justice didn't come in a courtroom or in shouted words. It came in the life I rebuilt piece by piece without him. If there is one thing I've learned, it's this: anyone who demands you shrink so they can stand taller is not offering love. Love does not ask for smallness. Love makes space even for dreams that seem bigger than the room. Before we close, I'd love to know, has there been a time when you had to choose yourself, even when it meant walking away from someone you thought you couldn't lose? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more true family stories, stay connected here.